last area, right? Okay. The final phase, okay. All right, okay, that's all I have.
So we just get a bunch more homeowners aggravated with the dust, dirty road. Further discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
We should have talked to them about doing something with the road. Yeah, I know, but do we still have petitions that are valid for 120th Street?
Well, I would leave that to bond council. They're pretty old,
That's really who I was
like
asking.
20 years old. So
Are they a little stale, or?
Those are outside the period in which I will give you a unqualified bond opinion for the purpose of any financing.
are you trying to
So
get?
they're not valid, is what you're saying?
I'm not saying they're not valid. I'm saying that they are not within a reasonable time enough to support the financing opinion I have to give.
That's just an opinion,
That's correct.
right?
Are they planning a new entrance on that north side?
No, their only point of access is an emergency access onto 120th
The
Street.
maintenance backs? Okay.
All I'm saying is, you're adding more houses, more homes, more complaints about the dust coming from the gravel road. So, it's coming. Item 19, excuse me, Central Park Shelter.
Mr. Mayor and Council, as you're probably aware, with Phase 2 of Yorktown, the alignment, which we did add a slide that is actually not in your packet. If they want to go to the last slide, I believe in this item, shows the alignment of Yorktown along with the existing shelter in the top.
The general population is having a higher incidence of cancer than anything else that's going on right now, as evidenced by all of the Cancer Center for America and Houston Cancer Center and Wichita Cancer Center and Via Christi Cancer Center ads that we see on TV all the time. There are cancer centers everywhere. That's because lots of people are having to deal with cancers. And there are some things that go along with this time, distance, and shielding that you can do to help protect yourself from some forms of cancer. Obviously not everything, but some things. 54% increase in the last 10 years of skin cancers. I don't have the exact number of how many were melanoma versus non-melanoma, but 54% more, or 54% increase in skin cancers in the last 10 years. Why is that? We're not, any closer to the sun, really, but we are taking for granted our exposure. There are some problems with our atmosphere that the science people will get into, and we're not going to deal with all of those aspects of things. But what can you do? Obviously, we can't get any further away from the sun, but you can distance your skin from it by layering with other layers of clothing. So instead of wearing, the little tank top out, you might want to put on a lightweight long sleeve shirt. That'll help protect you from that. Wear sunscreen. Put it on early and often. SPF 15 is one of the things that they recommend, at least SPF 15, and put it on every hour. If you're getting wet, sweating a lot, put it on every 30 or 45 minutes rather than every hour. Put it on repeatedly. I'm one of the biggest offenders when it comes to sunscreen. I don't like to wear a lot of sunscreen. It just feels greasy, and I'm busy, and it bothers me. So I wind up not wearing it. So I'm probably going to be one of those categories, simply from my own issues that I have. But I don't want any of you guys to do it, and maybe I'll start wearing some more sunscreen. If you see me out in the sun, maybe you guys can help encourage me to wear some sunscreen too. 1 in 5 of us will develop some form of skin cancer from UV rays. There's 13 people in here? That's not a good number. I don't like to see that. 90% of the non-melanomas are related to UV exposure, whether that's from the sun or from the tanning beds or some other UV form of radiation that we find ourselves around. And 343 million in costs. That's an amazing number. And if we think about from our insurance perspective as a city, what can we do to help prevent some of that 343 from getting tagged into our own pockets again? Prevention. Well, we talked about the SPF 15 or greater. Wear that sunscreen, wear it often. Reapply it regularly. Long sleeve shirts, wear them light in color. Now our shirts aren't the lightest in color anymore, but they are a new modern material that's moisture wicking, so that helps to keep you a little cooler. My brother's back here wearing the really dark stuff, although it looks awesome in the summer, it's really hot. And if we can wear light colors when we're out exposed to the sun and the heat, it helps us keep our body a little bit cooler. Along with that, wear a hat. My law enforcement friends, well, know, all of us know the highway patrol guys. Those guys are tight about wearing your hat. We should be wearing a hat too. There's a reason for it. Our flora and fauna. Being concerned with the plant life around us. When we're out working in the yards and gardens and taking hikes on trails and that sort of thing, we can get exposed to some things that can cause us irritation. Things like poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac, rose bushes, thorn bushes. The thorn bushes are really pretty easy to see, and as long as you stop when you first engage them, they don't tear you up too bad. But if you don't really know what poison ivy looks like, you might be walking through this patch of ivy that looks really nice, and you think it's just, pretty little ivy ground cover stuff, but it's poison ivy, and the next thing you know, you're all broke out in hives and little things that look like that all over your body, and that's no fun. So how do we deal with poison ivy? Well, the first thing, just like that we started out with, time, distance, and shielding. Stay away from it if you can. Don't be walking through big piles of the poison ivy and poison oak. Be able to identify it. So poison ivy has 3 leaves, and typically the base, they're in a little cluster together. Typically the base 2 leaves will have what kind of looks like mittens, but they're backwards. So if you can see, let me back up this picture. Does this laser work? Oh, it does. See the little appendage there? And you can maybe see it in your handout. There's a little appendage on those leaves. That's what we call the thumb of the mitten of those leaves. And those base leaves are the ones that have them. So stay out of the poison ivy. The next one over, that's a pile of poison sumac. It gets those little berries in clusters underneath. Poison ivy will develop the berries too. Not quite as many. And then poison oak kind of looks like an oak leaf in a vine format. It's also a vine format as opposed to a tree, but it looks like little oak leaves. In the fall, these things all turn bright red. Bright colors in nature typically tell us to have caution or be warned about it. And so the poison ivy turns that bright red color to help you identify it and know to stay away from it. The ivy resins, the oils that are in these plants, is persistent. So if you get it on your shirt, and you're wearing a long sleeve shirt, you take your long sleeve shirt off and set it over here. Tomorrow you put your long sleeve shirt back on, not even thinking about anything, you may wind up with poison ivy. Or even worse, the person hanging out next to you in the concert might wind up with poison ivy because they got it off of your shirt. So you need to wash those things pretty quickly in hot soapy water, that sort of thing. If you get it on your hands, wash your hands, warm soapy water. If you have the rash that looks like those sorts of things, you don't want to scrub and pop those blisters off because the fluid in those blisters carries some of the oil and the ivy, and it'll spread it around to you and whoever else. So you want to wash your hands good and well, wash this area well, but pat it dry with some sort of a disposable towel, or immediately put that towel where it can be washed separately and not get mixed in with all the rest of your clothes, and thus get your whole household covered in poison ivy in places that we don't really want to talk about. Poison ivy typically will have striated lines with its rash. There'll be looks like a little track mark, series of little hives that form up, and they will itch. And so what do we do about that? Well, we're going to wash it with the cool water, use a calamine lotion or hydrocortisone lotion or something like that, apply that topical drying lotion to help dry those oil resins out that are in the areas of your skin and the pores of your skin. And that will help to get rid of that ivy don't scratch it. That's the worst thing that you can do. How can we prevent it in the field? Well, stay away from it. If you've got to be through it, wear long sleeve shirts, long pants, a hat. Take those things off carefully when you're done getting through it. Put it where they don't cross-contaminate other things. And there is some commercial products available. One of them is called Ivy Block, and it's a pre-application, kind of like sunscreen lotion, and it works pretty well. But just like sunscreen, if you sweat or are in a pool or in a lake, it washes off of you. So just putting it on once through the course of a day, if you're going to be exposed to ivy a lot, doesn't really help out. Our insects, bees and wasps and all that sort of thing. Again, time, distance, and shielding. If we have the time to not engage with the bumblebees and the wasps to get where we're going, well, that might be the better route. Stay away from them. Put some distance between you. Shielding. Wear long sleeve shirts. Beekeepers wear significant shielding when they're messing around with the bees, but they're in there right up close and personal, and they're messing with their house and stealing their honey and all that sort of jazz. So we're not going to be doing that, at least I should hope not. The first session we kind of talked about whether or not parks folks have a contact in the area who is a beekeeper. I know we used to have one, but I believe that person passed away. There is a beekeeper that lives out by me off of Santa Fe Lake Road, but I think they're a hobby keeper. I don't know whether they would come and help take care of a hive of bees if somebody should find some or not. The thing about bee stings that separates them from the other types of insect bites and stings is that the bee will leave his stinger in you. He will sacrifice his life to keep you from messing with his hive or whatever the situation is that's gotten you sideways with each other. When they sting you, that stinger, just like a needle, like a hypodermic needle, it has a little barb on the end of it, unlike a hypodermic needle, and it will stick in your skin and stay there. And there are nerves and muscles in the poison sac that bee has, and it will continue to pulse and pump venom or poison into your body. So you need to get that stinger off. And the method to do that is to not freak out and grab it really quickly and pinch it and pull it off, because you will just have hyper-injected yourself with everything left in that poison sac. You want to use something with a relatively sharp edge, not a pocket knife, but a credit card or a car key, something like that has a nice rigid edge. You could use the back edge of a pocket knife blade, maybe with it still folded, something like that. And you're going to scrape across the where the stinger has implanted itself in your arm, just like that picture right up there, and scrape that stinger right off of there. So what do you do after you get the stinger off? You're going to use some ice. That will help to prevent the area from swelling to a certain degree. Also, going to use like a hydrocortisone cream or a calamine lotion, something of that nature. Did you have a question?
Baking soda and tenderizer.
I was just about to get to the home remedies. See, you don't need some silly person like me. You guys know some of this stuff. She's absolutely right. Meat tenderizer with baking soda and a little bit of water, good old water, forms a poultice. You do not need chimney soot biscuit flour and lard. That does not work out very well. But meat tenderizer, the baking soda, and a little bit of water will form that poultice, and it will help pull that venom type material off of the skin and out of the pore that has been created there. As well as the tenderizer creates a little bit of an analgesic, painkiller kind of sensation. It kind of deadens the nerves in that immediate area just a little bit. Too much, and the zombies will show up and try and eat you because you've now flavored yourself. But, see, you have to have a little bit of, thank you for laughing at that. You can use that if you want to sometime, Mark. I am too. With wasps and hornets and yellow jackets and those kinds of things, they have the ability to keep stinging. So they hit you once, they'll buzz off, and they'll hit you again if you continue to mess with them. The best way to deal with those is some time and distance. Just leave them alone. Or there are some commercial sprays available and that sort of thing. Those all work really, really pretty well, except you don't want to breathe them. So again, create some shielding for yourself if you're going to use one of those. The last thing you want to do is get that wasp nest up in your corner of your deck or wherever, go to spray it and have the wind blow the spray right back in your face, because that stuff is poison, right? You don't want that all over you, and you don't want to be inhaling all that sort of thing. So use some eye protection, use a little simple face mask, kind of a thing that you can get at the hardware store, and protect your body when you're doing that. The meat tenderizer, see right there it is, see right there, meat tenderizer. And then some ice. You might use some Benadryl to help with some of that reaction in that spot and in that site. Some people are hyper allergic to things like bee stings. We're going to transition in a little bit and talk just a little bit about the EpiPens and how that process works. In our earlier class session, we had somebody that carries an EpiPen and they kept it in their car. Does anybody in here, in this group, actively carry an EpiPen with them? Your son? So we have some exposure and some understanding of the process. We'll talk through how we utilize EpiPens and some of the benefits that they have. Again, with the stings, cleanse it, dab it dry, use some ice to cool the swelling in the area, oral Benadryl, or some topical antiseptics and those kinds of things to help with the pain. Anaphylaxis. So if we are hyperallergic to poison ivy, to bee stings, to to lots of things, and one of the things that starts to happen is our throat starts to swell closed, our mucous membranes start to produce lots of material, snot and saliva and that sort of thing. The biggest complication that we have is our difficulty in breathing. And eventually someone can stop breathing and your heart can stop, and that can be a really bad thing from just a simple little bee sting. So those people who are really hyper allergic to those things, they know, and they have an EpiPen. So if you are in a situation where you're needing to administer an EpiPen to somebody, you also are in a situation that you need to be calling 911. That's awesome. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. If you didn't hear that on the TV, we have a severe thunderstorm warning coming up. Wow, there's me. Oh gosh. Everybody loves to see yourself on television. So our EpiPen, we actually have two of them here, and this one we'll pass around. Please do not take this one out of the container. These are real, live, poke you, inject you with juice EpiPens. However, they are expired. And so that's one of the things that I want to, if you're with somebody that has an EpiPen, or you know someone in your family or a close friend that has EpiPens, suggest to them that they check them periodically and make sure that they are not expired. You guys have all seen these, but we'll start those around. They typically come in that 2-pack. They are not cheap. This one, these two are trainers, and the trainers typically function very much like the standard EpiPens do, and they have either one or two caps. There's a needle inside, a pre-filled syringe, and a spring-loaded mechanism that will inject the medication into the person when you utilize them. Most of them operate very much in the same way. They either have one or two safety caps on them, and you simply pop off the cap. And before you do that, you ought to take a look and read it real quick, the instructions, to make sure you know whether it's a 3-second administration, a 5-second administration, or a 10-second administration. If you don't have time to read it and you just administer it, count at least 5 seconds. Okay? And the proper way to administer these things is just pop that cap off, and you're going to hold it out to your side if you're administering it to yourself for some reason, or your associate, and you're going to strike it into their thigh, the meaty part of their thigh, and hold it nice and steady for about 5 seconds, up to 10 seconds. At 10 seconds, all of the medication that's in there will have been delivered totally without any question. And so that's more than 5 seconds. So the needle has now retracted. Of course, this is a trainer, so it doesn't have, gosh, I hope that was a trainer, yeah. So it doesn't have an actual needle inside here. But the needle will have retracted back inside that orange thing, but just because it's inside there, you shouldn't just toss it around. You should put it back into its container tube so that you have that spent one that you can take to the doctor with you or the emergency room. Here's the one I used. And you should make note of the time that it was delivered, 7 minutes after 4. That way, the ER staff or the doc knows exactly when that medication was delivered, and then they can evaluate whether it's functioning appropriately or whether they need to give more, and those sorts of things. So I'll pass these two around. Feel free to stab yourselves. And we'll answer any questions about those here in a little bit as well with anything else. What else have we got? There's the instructions up there if you weren't able to listen to what I had to say. Basically all exactly the same thing. There are a number of different manufacturers. The pins look a little bit different. Some of them have 2 caps, some of them only have 1 cap. But it's a good tool to have in the event that you have to deal with anaphylaxis in your family. Mosquitoes and ticks. I just heard on the radio today as I was driving around looking at our flood water, there was a discussion about whether or not there's going to be more mosquitoes this year because of the flood stuff. And the 2 experts said, one of them said, no, because all of the laying places have been washed downstream. The other one said, well, that's true, but the ones that were upstream are now where you are. Their eggs are now where you are, so you're still going to have them. Plus, the water tends to lay around and in stale, stagnant spots, and you tend to get more. So then they went into the argument about whether the citronella candles and all that stuff and which bug spray works the best. And they all decided at the very end the best way to prevent being impacted by mosquitoes is stay away from their habitat, be cautious when you're out at dusk or early in the morning at dawn, which is when they're the most active, and wear long sleeve shirts and hats. Time, distance, and shielding. Should you get mosquito bites, ice, calamine lotion, those kinds of things tend to help. Benadryl, maybe. Ticks are a different story, though. And when we get our ticks when we're walking through wooded areas, grassy things. A lot of times ticks can even get up into the trees and fall down on us. Another good reason to wear a hat and a long sleeve shirt. Should you get a tick, you want to get rid of that tick really pretty quickly. You don't want to let it sit there and have lunch, and especially not for several days. That can be really bad for you because the ticks, as they consume blood off of you, and they probably have consumed blood off of something else too, so you really don't want that going on, but they may regurgitate and spit whatever they had been eating back into you. That's when we get really good infections going on from tick bites, is when that has happened. And that lets us know that a tick has been on somebody for a while. You want to get those off. There are some commercially available fancy tools that kind of look like a claw hammer or a nail puller that you can hook the head of the tick with and slide it through there, and it'll just pop the tick right off. I personally have had really good luck just getting a hold of the head of the tick with a pair of tweezers or my own fingernails, and a light twisting motion as it pulls off. There's a lot of different techniques. The most important thing is don't squeeze the bulbous body of the tick, because that will squirt that material right back into you, and that is not what we want. So don't do that. Don't use a lighter to burn the silly thing off, because the first thing that it's going to do is it's going to get hot and it's going to spit into you, and then you're going to burn yourself, and that's not good either. The old adages of using cooking oil or soap and things like that to cause them to not be able to have air exchange typically don't work very well, and then you still have to pull the tick off, because if they do happen to die, they are stuck there. So remove ticks with a light twisting motion, or get one of those fancy little tools that can help to pop the tick right off of your leg or your ankle or arm or wherever it could be. But again, the best thing, wear clothing and stuff that can protect you from it. Bug spray, and there are some other commercially available pre-application things that you can put on your person that helps to prevent them. I have become allergic to sulfur in its raw form. When I was in Scouts years ago, we used to carry blocks of sulfur inside of a sock that became powdered, and you pat it around your ankles of your socks, and it would keep ticks away. We had soap that was infused with sulfur. It worked pretty good. I've become allergic to it, so I can't use it anymore. Our good friends, the snakes. So our part of the world has a number of different snakes, and depending on who you talk to at the state, they may or may not agree about water moccasins. They will tell us that water moccasins are not in the state of Kansas at all. I will tell you that I've seen 2 of them personally in the southeast part of the state. I haven't seen any around up here, but I have seen them in the southeastern part of the state down along waterways. The upper left is a copperhead. That is a very prevalent snake, and they've been flooded out just like everybody else. So they're probably pretty active right now trying to find some place to hide. The one to the right on the top is a Massasauga rattlesnake. They are beginning to become more prevalent in our area. They are very prevalent in southeast Kansas. They're a pretty fat snake. They're not real long. They're a pretty thick-bodied snake, whereas the copperhead remains a fairly thin snake most of its life. The bottom 2 are rattlesnakes. The Massasauga is also a rattlesnake, by the way. The prairie rattler and the timber rattler. And depending on whether you're in prairie or timber type materials, they are both in this part of the state. You don't have too many people having interactions with them because they really don't like people any more than we like the snakes, and they tend to kind of stay away. Timber rattlers, you're going to find them balled up in timber places where there's deadfall timber and woods and stuff like that. So if you're digging through a pile of rocks or logs or lumber, you might want to be attentive to what's going on around you. Make sure you're wearing gloves, good thick heavy leather gloves if you're in snake environment. Make sure you've got good tall boots to protect your ankles and lower calves. As I think that picture there, that's a pretty typical snake hit above the ankle for somebody. And most snake hits usually come because A, you didn't see it and you stepped on the poor fella and he didn't give you any warning early, or B, you were being overly brave and started messing with them, and those are the people that get hit on their hands. A good friend of mine got hit on the hand because he's not afraid of snakes at all, and he picked up a young Massasauga and it gave him a full dose. Young snakes are worse than old snakes too, by the way, because they can't regulate the amount of venom that they give. And the young snake will give you its full venom, whereas a larger snake is able to evaluate how much venom it needs to take care of its prey, and it knows you're so much bigger than it is, it just wants to give you enough to give you the message to leave me alone. And so it regulates that to save some venom for itself to go hunting with. But his whole arm and chest swelled up, and he was black and blue for a month. It was pretty crazy. So identification of our snakes. Our poisonous snakes will have very rough scales. They will have flatter, triangular-shaped heads, and they will have cat's eyes, a vertical slit in their pupil. It'll look like a cat's eye. Non-venomous snakes will have more elongated, oval-shaped heads. They will have perfectly round pupils, and a lot of times they will be shiny. They'll have shinier scales. The one caveat to that is the water snakes around here have rough scales, but they have the rounded heads and the cats are the standard round eye. So those are the non-venomous ones. Their scales are rough because that's what allows them to get friction and be propelled and propel themselves in water that are called keeled scales. This doesn't really talk about keeled scales, but hopefully nobody has to look at a snake bite. But if you get bit by a snake and you don't know whether it's a venomous snake or not and the snake has disappeared, look closely at the bite that you got. And you can tell from the bite itself many times whether it was a poisonous snake or not. A poisonous snake will always hit you with its fangs. It may not always give you venom, but it will always hit you with its fangs because the act of opening its mouth opens the fangs. A non-venomous snake has 2 rows of teeth in the top of its jaw, only 1 row in the bottom. Venomous snakes have the 2 fangs in the top jaw and 1 row of teeth on each side. Up close and personal with snakes, that's as good as we need to get, right? Their habitat varies by species. We talked briefly about the timber rattler. The prairie rattler obviously is in upland prairie, tall grass and stuff like that. For some reason, they kind of like to hang out around golf courses because there's all these little white things that look like eggs. I don't know. Piles of limbs, piles of rocks. They're most active in the evening time because this is when they hunt. They hunt frogs and toads and mice and rats and gophers and all of that sort of thing, depending on how big the snake is. So if you have a lot of toads and frogs hopping around wherever you're at, there is probably a water snake somewhere that is hunting those things. It's probably not a venomous one, but just don't be surprised if you discover a snake happening around that area. Prevention, stay calm. The snake is just as freaked out about you being there as you are about it being there. If you can just back away, back away. If you know you're going to be in snake territory, have the appropriate shoes and gloves and that sort of thing. Have a stick, and the stick is not so much for you to pick the snake up and deal with, it's for you to kind of probe the piles of leaves in front of you or to place on the rocks in front of you to make sure that there's not something else going on there. Who knows anything about severe weather? I know earlier we had Carrie from EMA here talking all about severe weather. The only thing I want to bring up is that you need to be aware of your surroundings. Time, distance, and shielding protects us from the elements of severe weather. If you know ahead of time where storms and such are going to be, you can plan your routes accordingly, you can plan your timelines accordingly, you can make sure you take your rain gear or umbrellas and hats and coats and all of those sorts of things to be well protected during severe weather. If we have thunder going on, let's not be out there. Those of us that have control over the baseball diamonds and those kinds of things, yeah, it's important to play the game, but is it so important that we get somebody hurt? Just trying to get that one last inning or that one last hole if you're out playing golf, what have you. Be really attentive, and don't be that guy. We don't ever want to find ourselves or anybody that we know being engaged in that sort of level of danger. A, because it's obviously dangerous to them. It's going to be really costly to that dude. He was on his way to a wedding with $25,000 worth of sound equipment in the back of his trailer, which is no more. Plus, he put a whole bunch of us at risk to go and save him. And so, let's not be that guy. All right, that is the gist of that. We went just a tiny bit longer than what was advertised. Does anybody have any questions? Extra value, obviously. Does anybody have any questions? Because I'll bring you the microphone. Yes, ma'am.
Extra value.
Yes, boss.
You may not know this, but generally speaking, if you're allergic to bees, well, you know that pretty much your whole life. I mean, you don't all of a sudden get allergic at age 50. Just use it as an example.
So you could become allergic after having several exposures. So if you get stung by a bee once and it doesn't bother you at all, several years later you get stung again and it bothers you a little bit more, and then a couple years later you get stung again and your whole arm swells up, then I would say you have become allergic to bees. Yeah. Right. And so if you want to do that, get one of those beekeeper hats to protect yourself. Okay. Any other questions? If somebody comes up with something, you know where to find me and how to get a hold of me here through the city, and happy to help answer any questions or whatever at any point in time. Everybody be safe. Have a great day. By the way, the rivers are going down now. They appear to have crested everywhere, in our area anyway.